Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Easton, president of the Claire Booth Luce Policy Institute, and I want to welcome you to our May Conservative Women's Network Luncheon. I want to give a special thank you to our co-host, Heritage Foundation, Bridget Wagner. We've been doing these every month for many, many years, and it's always such a pleasure to work with the Heritage Foundation. Now I'm happy to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Christina Hoff Sommers, who's been a regular speaker for the Claire Booth Luce Policy Institute almost from the beginning, 20 plus years for sure. Christina has lectured and taken part in debates on more than 100 campuses, college campuses, and today she's going to talk about the culture of radical feminism that has taken over many universities and whether or not women are truly empowered by it. She'll specifically discuss a recent lecture at Georgetown University that was actually sponsored by the Claire Booth Luce Policy Institute, which has gone viral because of ridiculous protests staged by feminists on campus. What happened at Georgetown, in my opinion, is the latest way that the left on college campuses tries to censor conservative thought, any thought they disagree with. My favorite sign they plastered all over the school and held up as Christina was speaking was, "Trigger warning, anti-feminism." These poor, delicate little girls were going to be terribly upset by the discussion of feminism. Two other signs, I hope you don't mind me showing this. Our lecture director captured these. These signs are all over the school. This one, safe space. All are welcome to come if they feel triggered or upset by today's events. Hate speech will not be appreciated in this space. And then it tells them where they go for this safety. Here's another one. Trigger warning. This event will contain discussions of sexual assault and may deny the experience of survivors. Well, not really, but these were all over the school and they were holding these signs as well. Christina is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and previously was a professor of philosophy at Clark University, where she specialized in moral theory. Her articles have appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times, to name just a few. And she's been on lots and lots of television programs, 60 Minutes, Oprah Winfrey, twice on Comedy Central's The Daily Show. She's also the author of some wonderful books, including her latest, Freedom, Feminism, Its Surprising History and Why It Matters Today. One of her earlier books, titled Who Stole Feminism? How Women Have Betrayed Women, was written in 1995. And for years, Christina, that was required reading for all of our interns and our staff until you put out some new books. What an excellent book that was. And as a mother of three sons, one of my favorite books of Christina's is called The War Against Boys, How Misguided Policies Are Harming Our Young Men. Christina earned a BA from New York University, a PhD in philosophy from Brandeis. She has two grown sons, and her favorite hobby is cycling. Please join me in welcoming Christina Sommers.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, the Heritage Foundation, for hosting this luncheon. I must say that it is a pleasure to be addressing a crowd that's not full of triggered, panicked individuals bearing signs accusing me of being an agent of the capitalist, hetero-patriarchal, oppressive male hegemony. I'm surprised that I'm speaking somewhere that Heritage Foundation hasn't provided a safe room for those to flee while I speak. I do hope everyone is feeling secure and validated. I am going to make one suggestion. I ask that there be no clapping. At a recent feminist conference, there was memos went out urging people not to clap because that could be triggering. They were advised instead to use something called feminist jazz hands. So I told that to the audience at Georgetown, and in fact, I've seen some of the videos, and there's like a boy going like that. Anyway, please be mindful of others in the room, as it says. For the next 20 to, well, that's sort of triggering. For the next 25 to 28 minutes, if I speak quickly, I am going to attempt to describe for you the state of campus gender politics, and I'm also going to try to give you an explanation of why it's all happening. Not to worry, there will be plenty of time for discussion and for sharing. I have been lecturing on campuses for more than 20 years. I have never seen anything like what I'm facing today. And the media covered what happened at Georgetown and Oberlin. Before that, I was at UCLA and Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo and met with the same sort of antics. And as a defender of sort of a moderate, I think, common sense, equality feminism, and a critic of hardline, the patriarchy is devouring us. I'm a critic of that style of feminism. I'm often faced with opposition on campus from gender activists. But in the past, they came to spar, to debate. Sometimes they boycotted. This is new. When I go to campuses now, I mean very recently, the last few months, they protest my presence on campus as a threat to their mental health. And again, I'm not opposing feminism. I'm offering a different vision of female empowerment, which I call equity feminism. But even that is thought to be, panic-inducing. Now, it's easy to laugh at all of this, and we will, but it's also melodramatic, and the psychobabble and the self-involvement is staggering. But let me be clear about a few things before making fun of it. I am certain that there are some young women and men on campus who have suffered from traumas and who need help. Some students need taken care of, and I certainly, if I had someone like that in my classroom, I would be sympathetic. But there's no evidence that this is more than a tiny minority of students. And I will tell you, this movement with safe rooms and panic attacks and places for them to go because they have PTSD because of their traumas and so forth, I don't really believe that this is about protecting vulnerable people. I see it as a kind of power grab by gender activists. Instead of having to persuade others of the rightness of their cause with evidence and argument and reason, they shame and intimidate them with their psychodramas. Now, I also want to mention that I'm one of the reasons, but by the way, both at Oberlin and Georgetown, I wasn't even there. I wasn't there talking about sexual assault. I was talking about freedom feminism, the style of feminism that I believe in and have advocated since I became a feminist in the 70s. I have been an equality of opportunity feminist. And I like to tell students, you don't have to be anti-feminist. You can still believe in female empowerment, but you don't have to be carried away with this left-wing hardline agenda, blaming men and being bitter and humorless and so forth. You don't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be like that. So that's what I was going to talk about, but they had found some other things that I had written that questioned statistics about campus assault, and so that's what led them to protest my presence on campus. And they called me a rape apologist or a rape denier, and I'm certainly not that. In fact, I've never denied the horrific reality of campus sexual assault. It exists. It happens. It's terrible. But I don't see how exaggerated statistics help victims. Quite the contrary. I think because this crime is so serious, we have to fight it with serious research, solid statistics. There's just no good evidence, however, that places like Oberlin and Georgetown, Wesleyan, Swarthmore, UCLA, there's no evidence that these are overrun by, an epidemic, crisis levels of sexual predation. Now, let's get back to jeering at some of the things they're doing. At Oberlin, even before I got to campus, there were, and at Georgetown as well, there were sort of hysterical postings on Facebook and warning one another about what was about to happen. This woman was coming, this rape apologist, and they just were carrying on and about their safety. They carried on so much that the administration at both Oberlin and Georgetown became concerned about my safety. And for the first time, I think, in the many years I've been on campus, I had security guards. There was a plainclothes, or one or two plainclothes policemen in the audience at Georgetown. I was trying to figure out who they were. Were they doing the jazz hands? At Oberlin, I had police escort, very nervous policewomen kind of looking at this. And when I came into the room, it was full, packed. I mean, look, if they thought that people shouldn't listen or would be triggered by my lectures, then just stay in your room. But instead, they made such a fuss that everybody wanted to come and see this extremist and protest and register their objection. And so I came in, the first few rows were filled with young women with red duct tape on their mouths. They kept there the whole time. God, I couldn't even breathe thinking about it. But if your nose is stopped, I don't know, they never took it off. And then everyone had placards, and every time I would say something, there would be jeering or booing or this sort of thing. And it was kind of exhausting. I needed a safe room. And then when I left, when it was over, the two security guards sort of escorted me, and then I went with some. In that case, I had been invited by the college Republicans and Libertarians, a very small group at Oberlin College. But we went out, and the police drove us off campus. So I have never seen that before. So anyway, so much for safety issues. I didn't really feel threatened, but you never know. These postings were so intense and zealous. Now, so one of the things that happened right before I got to Georgetown was they wrote, at Oberlin, they wrote a letter, and it was signed by, I couldn't even count, it goes on and on, this is just the beginning of this, 100 or 200 students, whole organization signed this letter called A Love Letter to Ourselves, which is sort of poignant, I guess. And in this letter, it starts with a trigger warning. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, the trigger warning says, this letter contains discussion of rape culture, online harassment, victim blaming, and rape apologism. Now, trigger warnings developed initially in the feminist blogosphere, and typically they appeared at the beginning of articles to alert readers that there might be sensitive, upsetting material. And that's fine if people want to have a blog and they're discussing trauma. I can understand they might want to do that. But what happened is these warnings moved from the blogs to newspapers, to classrooms. And now you have these liberal professors who are like shocked that students come up to them and say, you know, you should have put a trigger warning before you assigned The Great Gatsby or Things Fall Apart. Or the other day, students at Columbia University, they realize that the Columbia has courses where they read the great books. Well, the great books just turn out to be a center of violence and rape and misfortune and all, things that make people uncomfortable. And so they have told the professors they think there should be trigger warnings for the classics because too much of the material, they say, marginalizes students' identities. So now even marginalizing your identity, no longer is it just connected to trauma, it's even marginalizing your identity, whatever that means. For the record, trigger warnings have no basis in clinical literature, in scientific fact. Richard McNally is a Harvard psychologist. He's an expert on anxiety disorders, and he recently published a review of the literature on the relevant research on things like trigger warnings, and he determined that if anything, these are actually harmful. And he pointed out that if a student genuinely has PTSD, typically the therapy is through systematic exposure, not avoidance. And there was one thing he said, and some other critics have said, a psychiatrist writing in the Chronicle of Higher Education said, one of the worst things about it is if you have a person who suffered trauma, you want them to overcome it, not make it the center of their identity. And this is what's happening on many campuses. Now, professors these trigger warnings are not only, they're not helping anybody, as far as I can tell, but, and the experts certainly don't see any basis for it, as I said, but they are also creating a hostile environment for critical thinking, for free expression. Professors now are intimidated. And a professor at Oberlin told me that it's very liberal professors. We're not talking about conservative professors. They're sort of afraid of their students. And one professor recently expressed fear, and he or she, it was an anonymous posting, but she said, "I'm afraid I'll say something, then I'll end up with, a bunch of triggered students occupying my office, carrying a mattress, or there'll be a Twitter petition demanding my head on a platter." Well, in addition to the trigger warnings, today's campus activists are creating safe spaces for one another. So this was in the New York Times that Brown University hosted a debate, and they brought in a feminist who believes strongly in that 1 in 5 women are victims of sexual assault. And then there was another person, a libertarian feminist, who did not agree with that. And they were having a debate. So what could be more balanced? Well, even this was thought to be distressing. They tried to get it stopped. They were panicked. And so they formed a safe space because they were very upset, as they said, that there would be a speaker who would invalidate our experience. So the safe room came equipped with cookies, coloring books, bubbles, Play-Doh, calming music, pillows, blankets, and a video of frolicking puppies. And I look at this and just think, this is what women's liberation has come to on a campus. Now, I have a weekly video blog. What was that? I forget what that was. The Factual Feminist, which I urge you to watch each week. I make a little video, less than 5 minutes by order of my producer. I'd like to make it 20 or 30, but it's fine. And I correct feminist myths and false statistics. Well, the gender activists at various colleges, they seem to consider these facts a form of hate speech. So on my campus visits, that's, why we get all the trigger warnings and so forth. Now, here's even more of what Michelle showed you. Some of these are from Oberlin, some are from, oh, I see it right there. Some are from Georgetown. But according to the Oberlin newspaper, 35 women retreated during my lecture to the safe space. They said 35 women along with 1 dog. I triggered a dog. Someone found a picture of him. He does. I'm so sorry I did that. Well, I'm not sure that's the dog. It's maybe an internet joke. Now, I'm not going to carry on about what's going on, but if any of you have read recently, or you remember 1984, George Orwell's dystopian novel, in that novel, you may recall he has a group called the Junior Anti-Sex League, and just young women marching around with red ribbons and terrifying everyone, and they want an asexual society. It's almost as if the Junior Anti-Sex League has occupied campus feminism, and that George Orwell, he was prescient in many ways, but this I've not seen until now. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining why this is alarming. Just a couple of quick observations. Since the time of Socrates, education has been synonymous with debate, inquiry, challenge. If universities replace the ideal of rigorous and free intellectual inquiry with safety, they will have lost their reason for being. And I'm also going to add that this is just all massively embarrassing to women, to feminism. I mean, safe space, trigger warning, fainting couch feminism. It gives the idea that women are just fragile, wounded little birds who can't cope with life. It's regressive. It's the opposite of what empowerment should be, or liberation. And finally, as I will keep saying, I do believe this is just an aggressive assertion of power. And it's a very novel way to do it, to assert your power and your right to prevail. Because if people don't do it, they will be, harming your health. And this is very confusing for campus officials because you're supposed to protect students from threats to their safety and threats to their mental health. But what if it turns out that, intellectual exchange is a threat to their mental well-being? Now, why is this all happening now? As I told you, I've been speaking for many years. I've never encountered anything like this. The first thing I will tell you is that gender studies departments, they have had safe spacers for years. The trigger warnings are new, but hypervigilance, and carrying on in melodrama around women's oppression under patriarchy, and this has been going on for decades. But it wasn't until recently that what I'm sort of call feminist melodrama, that it made its way from the gender studies seminars or the women's center. It made its way into the mainstream. What brought rape culture into the mainstream? Now, I've heard that term for years on campus, but I never read it in, Washington Post and so forth. How did that happen? What explains its new prominence in the public square? Well, I believe I know, and you can tell me why I'm wrong, but here is what I believe happened. I'm just going to give you a very shorthand version. I wrote at length about this in January in the Daily Beast. In 2010, a left-leaning journalism organization called the Center for Public Integrity, this group teamed up with NPR, National Public Radio, to produce a massive study describing a hidden rape and sexual harassment epidemic on campus. That's the study. Now, as I said, campus sexual assault is a real problem. It's a serious problem, and it would have been fine if they made a report about it and alerted people to, the binge drinking culture and lots of terrible things that are happening. But this report was not merely alerting the nation to a campus problem. This report made it seem like the nation's colleges were terrifying centers of male predation and cruelty. The executive director at the time, I think he retired recently, but Bill Buzenberg, he summed up the plight of millions of young women on campus in a single word: nightmare. According to the report, serial predators are roaming our campuses. The occasional victim who finds the courage to report her attack is unlikely to secure justice. And according to the report, they will be re-victimized by an invasive and humiliating procedures and an uncaring college administration. The report then singled out the Office of Civil Rights for special censure. And now the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education is the federal agency responsible for monitoring the Title IX equity law. And Title IX guarantees women the right to education equal to that of men. But this report asked a question: how can women have an equal right to an education if they are in an environment that is so hostile, so terrifying, so nightmarish that no one could expect to survive unscathed, untraumatized? In other words, in this report, NPR and the Center for Public Integrity sort of gave credibility to hardline gender feminism and all of their statistics, their twisted theories. It was all there. And they said that the Office of Civil Rights, this federal agency, was falling down on the job. They described it as a lazy, sort of feckless watchdog organization that's leaving students at risk. Now, this report was full of anecdotes that don't pan out. I checked some of them out. It was completely reckless. Well, I'll just keep talking. Can you hear me? They repeated without checking. I mean, you would have thought the Center for Public Integrity, these are high-powered journalists, NPR, maybe they would have been a little skeptical that 20% of women at Swarthmore and Auburn are being raped. And so, but no, they just reported it as truth. And it sounded all very scientific and official, and I contacted two of the lead reporters. Well, I attempted to contact Kristen Lombardi from the Center for Public Integrity and Joseph Shapiro at NPR. He never replied. He said, "We stand by our reporting, so no accountability there." I can understand why should he answer me, but I wish someone would ask Joseph Shapiro, because I like Morning Edition. And if you hear NPR and you hear his voice and he tells you, it sounds so true. Every time I hear it, I think, I would believe it. I probably did believe it. I asked Kristen Lombardi, I said, why did you repeat that 1 in 5 statistic without, don't you know that it's not taken seriously by criminologists, or even serious feminist researchers know that it's an exaggeration? And she said, we were on the phone, and she said, oh, well, it only came up once in the report, and it wasn't actually in the report, it was just in an introduction written by someone else. No, the statistic appears 5 times in the report, and it is used strategically to establish the urgency and the scope of the campus assault crisis. Well, let me put it this way. This NPR CPI report created a sensation. Now, there have been news stories about campus rape before, but never by such a distinguished team of investigators. And these findings were widely and uncritically reported. They won multiple journalism prizes, including a Peabody Award, which is like the Pulitzer Prize for radio, the Robert F. Kennedy Award for Justice and Human Rights Reporting, the DART Award for Excellence in Coverage of Trauma. But the greatest victory of all, the most important result, was that the U.S. Department of Education listened. Ruslan Ali, a little-known Education Department official, was galvanized by the CPI-NPR report, and she was singularly situated to act. She was the newly appointed Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights in the Obama administration, and she assured NPR, when they came calling and interviewed her for radio programs about this report, she assured them, quote, "We will use all the tools at our disposal, including withholding federal funds, to ensure that women are free from sexual violence." Now, NPR and the Center for Public Integrity, these, as I said, are very well-respected news organizations. They were alerting the secretary, the assistant secretary, to a catastrophe. Millions of women are being assaulted by ruthless criminals on our colleges, and the officials are doing nothing, and your office is frustrating their quest for justice. Well, she had already been planning on tweaking the regulations, but once these requests were presented to her as a kind of nightmare scenario, nothing short of drastic action would do. And as Kristen Lombardi would later tell a reporter, since our report ran, the Office of Civil Rights is going to be much more aggressive. Well, aggression is what came from Ali's she issued, and some of you may or may not have heard of this, but on April 4th, she sent out the now notorious Dear Colleague letter to every college in the land. And it provided detailed guidelines on the draconian steps that colleges would have to take to fight this, she called it a plague of sexual violence. She advised schools to determine guilt by the lowest standard. If young men were accused of harassment or assault, don't give them the benefit of doubt. Don't use even use the just if it's more likely that they did it than not beyond a reasonable doubt, not even that there's clear and convincing evidence. That's the lowest standard, a preponderance of evidence. And she instructed them to make sure the majors that they minimize burdens of complainants. There was not a word about rights of the accused, not a word about freedom of expression. Now, so what happened is, not only did you have NPR and the Center for Public Integrity, but now you have the Office of Civil Rights. They're all giving legitimacy to a kind of conspiratorial, safe space, trigger warning feminism. And these young women on the campus, as of about, it began to become clear that they were empowered, and the school was afraid of them, and they could make a federal case out of anything that went wrong on their campus that displeased them, that made them uncomfortable. By 2014, campuses were in full panic mode. The panic produced outbursts of fanaticism. There was I mentioned before, the mattress. This was Wellesley College. An artist put this sculpture there. It's not my favorite work of art. I can see reasons to take exception to it on aesthetic grounds, but the girls wanted it removed because it triggered them, and they were panicked and overwhelmed, and just acting out in more and more aggressive ways, empowered and taking action. And these people that would act that way, very aggressively, they had the backing now of members of Congress. And on campuses, there were efforts to ban songs like Robin Thicke's Blurred Lines, and students demanded trigger warnings at Harvard Law School. Some even thought that rape law shouldn't be taught at all, too triggering. Imagine lawyers not learning about sexual assault and laws. There was a wonderful article about this by one of the professors, Professor Sue, Jennifer Sue, I think, in the New Yorker. And meantime, dozens of falsely accused young men were subjected to kangaroo court proceedings and expelled from college. And these cases are heartbreaking. And I think by now more than 60 young men are suing their colleges. And all this happened after this letter that scared the colleges. The term rape culture, which, as I said, had previously been limited to gender theory seminars, began to enter the national lexicon. And otherwise sensible people came to believe that Yale, Swarthmore, Michigan, among other such schools, were among the most dangerous places for women on the planet. And as I said, political leaders, Senator Gillibrand and Claire McCaskill, jumped into the fray. Mattress Girl was invited by Senator Gillibrand to be a guest at the State of the Union. I don't think she brought her mattress, but it may. Chief Justice Ginsburg maybe needed it. Now, I'm almost finished. When Rolling Stone published its apocryphal article about a sadistic, premeditated fraternity gang rape at the University of Virginia, many who should have known better took it seriously. It was a Gothic fantasy nurtured by specious statistics, poorly designed studies, and panic. But the writers and editors of Rolling Stone, well, they're to blame for publishing the story, but it was these investigative journalists at NPR and the Center for Public Integrity who made it all seem real to so many people. Now, just to conclude, these journalists painted a false picture of campus life. That picture inspired Russell and Ali to take aggressive action. That created havoc in the media, in the White House, in Congress. In the current environment, anybody who is critical of the new sexual assault policies risks being denounced as a sexual assault enabler. Large numbers of professors, deans, college presidents, they're dismayed by the zealotry on their campus, but most of them have run for cover. Now, an honorable exception, and I'm very proud of this, that 28 Harvard Law School professors, many of them liberal, they issued a statement on October 15th challenging the moral and legal foundations of the Office of Civil Rights Policies. And one of the signatories was Elizabeth Bartholet. She's an expert on civil rights and family law, as well as she's very much a feminist. But she made a very powerful statement. She said, "I believe that history will demonstrate that the federal government's position to be wrong, and that our society will look back on this time as a moment of madness." Well, I just will say the madness not only doesn't shed any light on helping us to stop campus assault, but this panic, this madness is breeding chaos, it's breeding mob justice, it's claiming innocent victims, it's undermining social trust, it distracts attention from genuine abuse. And finally, it's not merely distracting us from effective solutions to campus assault, it's turning our campuses into hostile environments for freedom, for education, even for clapping. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much for explaining it and how we got here. I wasn't sure how we got here.
It's a theory, but it's true.
Oh, yeah, it clearly is. I think
Yeah.
it clearly is.
It was the Office of Civil Rights.
Right.
Why did they do it?
Right.
NPR, of all things.
Of all things. And thank you for having the courage and the gumption to go out and face this over and over again. Because every time you do that and we get the stories going, we sort of make the point again about how crazy the left and the feminists can be on some things.
Yes.
We have a little bit of time for questions. We have a microphone here. If you wouldn't mind, wait until the microphone comes to you so that the people who will be watching this on tape shortly will be able to see or hear who you are. If you give your name and your affiliation. And Christina, I'll let you.
I just don't want to linger on that slide. I
Oh.
want to get the dog back.
Oh, yeah. How do you go back here? Let's see. I don't know. I should. High tech here, right?
Or we can just turn it off.
I have a question.
Yes.
I mean, this is so puzzling. And, you know, somebody with a son in campus, a son on a college campus, I follow this closely and very nervously as a parent. As someone who has a daughter in Charlottesville, you know, I follow the UVA story very closely also. And then to hear you explain it, and it completely makes sense, you're kind of left dumbfounded. What in the world is their goal? I mean, it is not empowering, as you said. It takes away from people who have a legitimate
Right.
injury. I mean, it turns everything into such a chaotic scene on campus. Out of that comes what for them? What do they gain?
Well, I happen to be someone who has been watching this develop for years. And there was a time when I mean, I've always considered myself an equality feminist. And early in my career, the chair of my department asked me to teach feminist theory. And I thought, well, I'm a feminist. I'm a theoretician. Why not? I sent away for the textbooks. And we're talking about a long time ago, in the last millennium. And I remember getting these textbooks. And they were like nothing I had ever seen. As a philosophy professor, I thought there was a sacred commandment, thou shalt teach both sides of the argument. I never saw my classrooms as a forum for promoting my ideas. As a philosopher, I'm never 100% sure of my ideas, and I can see the opposition. And I wanted my students to grapple and have that experience of being fully convinced of a position on a metaphysical issue and then reading articles on the other side and realizing, oh, I was all wrong. And it's a wonderful thing to see how wrong you can be and reconsider. But I didn't find that in these textbooks. What I found was a kind of conspiracy theories about the patriarchy. And basically it was Marxism, warmed over, crossed out class, put gender. And that's what it's been ever since. So you have a large number of people, true believers in the campus, who are very invested in this theory about oppression and desperate to convey this to students. And they're always looking for the smoking gun on the patriarchy. So in the beginning, there was propaganda. They will grab at any set of statistics that prove the truth of their theories. Their theories are wrong. We don't live in a patriarchal, oppressive society. I mean, women have problems, but so do men. It's a complicated mix of benefits and burdens, whether you're a man or a female. Both sexes have their challenges today. But basic equality feminism is an American success story. They do not believe that. In fact, the better things appear to get for women, the more angry some of them become and desperate. I have never seen more desperation than today. And on campus today, what's remarkable is there are far more women than men. In many ways, because of the triumph of equity feminism, young women are encouraged, and it's a time to teach them to be, as ambitious and pursue happiness as they wish to define it. No young women have ever been so self-determining as young women at Wesleyan and Oberlin. I mean, these colleges, they have privilege, and yet they feel. So I believe that it goes back to these professors and their theories, and I'll add one other thing. Very early on, they discredited critics. I was relatively a kind of friendly critic. I was someone sympathetic to feminism, and I found myself excommunicated from the Church of Feminism. So this is a power grab by a very narrow group of hardliners who control. And unfortunately, the media hasn't figured it out. The media thinks that if you criticize feminism, you're criticizing women. So the mainstream, the New York Times and the Washington Post, they tend to take the side. They haven't figured it out. I think they may soon begin to tell what's going on, because right now even some very liberal left-wing journalists are alarmed. So The Nation has had some very good articles about the new fanaticism on campus, and Slate had one of the best of all. So there's hope there, but that's too. I went on too long, but they don't want it to be true. They believe it is true, and they eagerly accept because it corroborates their worldview. Yes, anyone.
Hi, thanks so much for speaking with us today. Brianna Walden with the Charles Koch Institute, and I'm curious by the numbers of women's groups and women's interest groups, and even this lecture series falls into that category. And you don't really seem to see that for men as much, or at least I'm not aware of that sort of like men's groups, the amount of men's groups or men advocating for men's issues. With this sort of rise of militant feminism, do you anticipate or do you see the counter to that arising among men, or what do you think the response is going to be?
Yeah, I think that men are being pushed to the limit, and you will see more men's rights groups. There's a lot of resistance to men. Men tend not to organize around their own oppression, and women. And women, we're all about that, We're complaining, and it's not fair, and we're good at that. And men don't do it as much. So they have to overcome a lot of inhibition. And I also think there's probably a healthy instinct in every civilized society to be protective of women. And so to organize men's rights, it seems you're going to have to overcome that and say, well, we're being harmed. I mean, it's very hard for men to do it, and they're going to get a lot of pushback. But unfortunately, this hardline group of they're taking advantage of that. So I do think there are a lot of men that are very hurt and confused. And I think this is a little bit of an overstatement, but I think if you were on many of these campuses, there's been severe damage to the rapport between men and women. It's been poisoned. It's awful what happened. So I'm hoping there will be more pushback. And I don't think this represents the majority. I think most young people are healthy, and young women like men, and they're not willing to believe the worst about them. Although if it's in the textbook and the teacher's telling you that, and other women are saying, yes, yeah, a lot of young women go along with it. So I do feel like, this is again a strong word, but this year, for the first time, I would say it felt like I was confronting a cult and cult members. And in that case, logic and reason, evidence is not going to work. We need deprogrammers. And maybe the men's rights groups, but I don't know if that's going to work.
Hi, thank you. I'm Kelly Monroe Kullberg, and you invited me to Clark years and years ago from the Veritas Forum.
Oh, yes.
Nice to see you. I now am developing something, the America Conservancy. And while you were talking, I'm just curious, I downloaded a lot of 990s and am interested in kind of the factual money trail behind some of these issues and shaping narrative. And so I just did a search on those for Center for Public Integrity, Center for Investigative Reporting, Center for Media Justice. And they're all funded hugely by a small handful of progressive foundations. So it's George Soros's Open Society Institute, and where that goes, the Ford, Rockefeller, and Carnegie of New York foundations and Kellogg also go.
Right.
So what I'm looking at is this big millions of dollars of money trail to those groups that are trumping up the narrative. And interestingly, the same groups trumped up the race narrative as well. And I think is it too cynical to think that this might precede election cycles?
Oh, I think that the war on women turned out to be just very helpful. and I will say the Republicans sort of contributed to it working by making, unfortunate remarks. Of course, the media goes to town on every time a Republican says the wrong thing. So that, yes, it feeds into the war on women narrative, very much so.
Hillary running, will we see more of this?
Definitely.
Yeah, I think it's the money that's shaping the narrative, and it funds the activist groups and the media to follow it.
I wouldn't even care if groups are doing this because, then that's just what happens in a democracy. People fund things and they go, but it's almost as if now we're all there's a lot of people, not me, but a lot of people are intimidated into silence. And if you challenge it, now professors and college presidents know that this Title IX is, but if you challenge it, so they have gone way too far, and to the point where it is no longer democratic. It's almost authoritarian, a kind of cultural authoritarianism. And I do think there are, I don't think people do it for the money. I think they are true believers, but it generates all sorts of jobs. There's a whole cottage industry. And what frightens me now, even if we tried to pull back on and we tried to approach the Title IX regulations and push back from what Secretary Ali did with the letter, there would be just a frenzied reaction on the campus, and the media would come against you, and you would be threatening jobs. Because if you look at the campuses now, there's been all these Orwellian names. The Harvard and Yale, they all have the new committee for personal sexual integrity on campus. Right, on there are dozens of them. It's a growth industry. So those people have an interest in generating more statistics, showing how bad it is. They have perfected the art of advocacy research. They can get any result they want. They can ask. So I expect we're going to hear more and more shocking statistics. Fortunately, the Bureau of Justice Statistics is still the gold standard in crime research, and they report kind of timidly and diffidently and nervously, but honestly, that it's not 1 in 4 or 1 in 5. It's more like 1 in 52 females on campus are victims of not just rape and sexual assault. And so that's the most trustworthy numbers. But the other number has currency, and I worry that these groups can create their own truths.
Couple more questions?
Hi, my name is Ruth Malhotra. I really appreciate you speaking today. It seems like the radical feminist opposition is getting more and more intense, but can you talk about some of the successes that you've seen? I know you've been at this for a long time, and I remember when you first spoke out about the vagina monologues and some of the other absurdities and really used that to illustrate the double standard. Can you talk about maybe some of the successes you've seen on campus when you and conservative women really spoke out?
Yes, I'll give you a few. One is that the most success I've ever had is with this video series, The Factual Feminist, because instead of 50 people or 200 people, some of them have had more than 500,000 views. I've made about 36 videos correcting misinformation on the gender wage gap, just on all sorts of little myths that are out there, and try to give good information about women in science, and whether or not it's a hostile environment for women in engineering departments or is something else going on. And I just have had a huge reaction. And now lots of Twitter followers, and you should follow me on Twitter. I'm very active and opinionated, but I back it up. I try to. So that's one thing, that's the new thing. Everybody should be there making the videos because you reach a large audience. Maybe it doesn't matter because now there are so many videos, but it gives me hope. The second thing is, this is really a battle. It's probably going to have to be fought on the left because they don't really listen to libertarians, conservatives. We don't really have a voice about campus policies, but I don't really know if they have the will to stop it until it gets so bad. So it's probably not going to stop until a few things happen. I actually went back to the Salem witch trials to see what's finally stopped that. It was a combination of bad publicity, going after people that were too powerful, and lawsuits. So I think we may see the wrong boys are going to get trapped by these kangaroo courts. So you'll have some powerful parents. It's already started to happen. There was already a feminist professor or a feminist psychologist who wrote in the Wall Street Journal some time ago. Her son was in one, and it was shocking. She was horrified that how he was just carried into this, and she spoke out. It radicalized her. So, and now these boys are suing. So, 60 Minutes will get a hold of these cases, and they'll be unbearable. The nation, it's not, Americans want to protect young women from violence, but we don't want to send innocent people into, exile, which is what's happening to these men. And another thing is humor. And the other day, someone issued I tried to put it on here. Maybe it's here. I don't think it made it. Maybe it did. No, it's not there. But I had someone made a song. They wrote an Oberlin College anthem. And just go to YouTube and look at the Oberlin College, Christina Hoff Sommers triggered anthem or something like that. It was in honor of my visit. And it's hilarious. And it's, 50 or 60,000 views in a couple of days. And it's still out there. I just think if comedians would begin they could help. You usually need, the artists and the comedians are usually ahead of the time. So that's my hope. And there was a brilliant article, I think it was Molly Hemingway in the Federalist, saying, maybe we need like humor speakeasies. Not to go for drinks. We can have drinks. We can go and hear jokes. We can hear comedians. And they could just, and you can say whatever you want. We should start having, something like that. And I think that's where conservatives can be helpful with providing some humor and pushback But other than that, I don't know. As I said, it's a contagion. Right now, it's a kind of panic, moral panic, and a contagion of hysteria, and that will be stopped by something other than philosophical arguments. I don't know exactly what's going to stop it this time. Reality will eventually prevail, but it could take a while, and it could be more frightening things may be in store. These girls are loaded for bear. They're not giving up. That's how they were supposed to go to other colleges in the fall. I'm wondering how that's going to be.
Can I ask another question? I heard a mention the other day that University of Chicago has put out a statement on behalf of free speech.
Right.
And I think there was another Ivy League university.
I think it was Princeton.
Princeton, exactly. Are you seeing this pick up, and are more alumni, inquiring if their universities have these statements in support of free speech? What's the reaction you're seeing from alumni? Well,
here's the thing. You all heard about the culture war in the 90s. We had these arguments, and actually, this has all happened before. In the early 90s, there was Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin and the McDworkinites and very, very extreme kind of feminism, and humorless and aggressive, and we pushed back. And the New York Times was on our side at that time, New York Magazine, the media, and we won the argument. And we thought, okay, now we've got the alums, and that wasn't enough, because they quietly assumed the assistant professorships. And they weren't moved by our arguments. Our arguments, we were just, even liberal women, Camille Pally is more libertarian, but Wendy Kaminer, there are liberal feminist women that used to be, kind of agree with them, and as soon as you disagree, you're excommunicated. So there's no way to criticize it. It's a closed system. It's not falsifiable. You can't get to it, and if you try to, you're part of the backlash. So we thought that it just turns out it really matters who's in the classroom, and that people have academic freedom. So it's almost as if we have to wait a few generations for everybody to retire. And the good news is that will eventually happen. The bad news is I'll be long gone by then. When they retire, my God, some of them are. And a friend of mine who, an intellectual historian at the University of Pennsylvania, he was very alarmed. He used to be angry at the academic left. He respected them, but he was angry. Now he said he's frightened because the younger ones are sociopaths. I mean, he may be he's overstating it. Maybe he meant to, but it's kind of true. So what's the solution? I told you, my talk was good on describing what's going on and explaining why, but what to do about it, that's a big question.
Do the last question in the back here. Is that okay, Christina?
Hi, Renee Smith from the Heritage Foundation. And what you've described here, this vitriol, this extremism, that coupled with what you mentioned in response to Bridget Wagner's first question about how far women have come in society, those things combined have made me as a conservative skeptical of the feminist movement in general. But it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and I do think that there's a place for it, and I would like, and this may be a longer discussion than we have time for, But I'm curious what you, as a feminist, you said equalitarian feminist and a freedom
Whatever, I give it different
feminist.
names. Freedom feminist.
Yeah, what you see are the really true remaining obstacles for equality for women, and how conservatives should really view feminism as a philosophy and a movement.
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because that was actually the topic I had been invited to speak to at Georgetown and at Oberlin and UCLA, and because I wrote a little book called Freedom Feminism, which is, I think it's free on Amazon by now, just a little text, a manifesto, where I said we do need a women's movement for a few reasons. One is that the huge battles for women's rights have been fought and won in the United States, most of Western Europe, but across the globe you have women struggling for. They haven't had, one wave, two waves of feminism, even a ripple. They are struggling, and I've been to international women's conferences where I meet the Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony from her society, and I'm so inspired by these women. And they come here and they want our help. They want to talk, they want to make common cause. And it sort of breaks my heart that there are all these women in these schools who are smart and privileged, and they're not doing that because they're focused on themselves. So that self-involvement is so terrible at a time where this could be the great challenge of our age. It's just as the 19th century we had to fight to overcome slavery, in the 20th century communism and totalitarianism. I think our century is the liberation of women around the world, is the fundamental human rights challenge. So for that, we need a women's movement. But even in the United States, there are issues that the feminization of poverty, the breakdown of the family and the impact that has on women and children, as well as misogyny in the popular culture. There's a lot of misandry, male bashing in the culture too. But I can see the need for a women's movement. But it should be a women's movement that has wide appeal. Now, here's the other thing. If you ask women today, are you a feminist? The latest poll that I saw was something like 18% of Americans will say they are feminists. It's a very small percentage. Most people want to distance themselves from the movement, and people don't identify with that unless they're really kind of gung-ho hardliner. So the movement is, I think, just very, very marginal now in American society, but the activists are very vocal. So it's, and so what I was going to say at Oberlin, what I actually did say, but I don't know if it was heard, it was probably booed, but that the movement has to be inclusive, and you have to have women in a women's movement. And I had historical precedents from the 18th century and the 19th century. Women made the greatest progress when these two paths of conservative, more traditional women and radical women worked together. They never really liked each other or got along, and Mary Wollstonecraft and Hannah More in the 18th century, they were never going to be friends, but they worked for a common purpose. And again, it happened in the suffrage movement. There were radicals and there were more conservative women, and it worked. And I said, the problems we have today, helping women in the third world, why should that be only for radical women? I mean, there are women across the political spectrum, and very religious, traditional, evangelical women that could change the world and make it so much better, and they could work on a cause like that with leftists and so forth. So bringing women together, that was my plea, but it wasn't heard.
And today on the college campuses where Claire Booth Luce does the work, they refuse to be inclusive. When young women that want to bring in a lecture, have a debate, go to the Women's Study Center that has money and ask, let's do a debate, let's have both points of view. Almost without exception, the answer is no, and they'll quite plainly say, your view of women is not the way we think of women. That's it. And they have the money, and they have the checks. So
Right.
You're right. The women's movement includes all of us as well, but not under today's higher ed, popular culture, and media view of it. So that's the battle, right?
Right. So I think we should take back feminism. Why should they have it?
That should be a book. I just want to thank you so much. Any young women who are in school, who are listening, on the tape especially, who would like to bring Dr. Sommers to your campus, please call us. We'll help you. We'll help you with money and how to do it and make the connections. This lady is so wonderful on a college campus because she's so contrary to all the stereotypes that feminists and leftists have about women like us. So we'd love to help you with that. We have a couple of little gifts for you here.
Oh, my goodness.
You've spoken for us so many times. You have so many of our limited edition coffee mugs. But I think this is a new limited edition mug for you. And what is the saying from Claire Booth Luce?
Oh, no good deed goes unpunished.
Yes.
Definitely.
Thank you.
And from Heritage, we always love to give books, and we've got our Heritage Guide to the Constitution. So much is about protecting our rights of free speech and actually following the rule of law. So
Oh, I'm going
to
to send that over to the Office of Civil Rights.
There you go. I love that. And we invite you all to join us. I believe we're going to have lunch just across the lobby in our Van Andel Center where we can continue the conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.